Good morning and welcome to First Presbyterian Church, Rushville. Today, January 17th, welcome to our virtual worship service. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim, so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. And the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call you, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And the Lord came to Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant hears." The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Both of these stories are stories of call to discipleship. The call to Samuel comes directly to God, to the boy Samuel. Old Eli, the priest whom Samuel serves, has disappointed God by letting his sons run wild in the temple. And God has chosen Samuel to replace Eli. And in the story from John, the call comes through Philip to Nathanael. "We have found the one spoken of by Moses. Come and experience the love of God manifest in this man Jesus. Come and serve Jesus." For both Samuel and Nathanael, the question is, how can you know the call is from God? Samuel thinks Eli is calling. Nathanael questions Philip's judgment. Many voices call us. How do we recognize a call to be from God? Many voices call to us in the night. Voices of our troubled world, of our fragmented society, voices of desperate people, voices confessing pain, desire, brokenness. These voices do not form a coherent harmony. They are dissonant. Who is calling us? To which voice should we listen? Each claims the truth. One voice says, look out for number one. Another calls us to surrender ourselves to a greater cause. The voice of the televangelist claims a hotline to God's will. The voice of ecologist warns us to save this planet. We hear anti-abortion voices and pro-choice voices, voices of creationists and of evolutionists, health experts and anti-maskers. Amid the voices in the night, how do we discern God's voice? In the dark night of the soul, sometimes I hear voices of self-doubt, reminding me of my failures, my shortcomings, my mistakes, telling me that I am not worthy to serve my Lord as a pastor. And then I hear another chorus of voices, affirming who I am and what I do, granting me permission to be patient with myself and to stop trying to be perfect. Sometimes we just get tired of the voices and we give up trying to hear truth from the cacophony of voices. We're not the first to struggle to discern the voices. The boy Samuel in our Old Testament story hears a voice in the night. The sun has set. The shadows blanket the world. He lays there, his eyelids getting heavy as he watches the lamp flickering before going out. Drowsiness envelops his body, and consciousness gives way to sleep. When suddenly he hears his name spoken, thinking it must be Eli calling, he jumps to his feet and runs to Eli's room. "Did you call me?" "No, my son, go back to sleep." Falling asleep a second time, the voice calls again. And Samuel goes to Eli, "Surely this time you called me." "No, son, I did not." Like Samuel, we hear the voices, but which voice in the night speaks the truth? Which is the voice of God? Samuel hears the voice not once but 3 times, and each time he thinks Eli is calling him. Old Eli senses that Samuel is hearing the voice of God in the night. "Go lie down. And if he calls again, you should say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" When the voice comes again out of the darkness of night, Samuel is then able to respond to the call of God. The voice of God indeed calls to us in the night. Amid the voices demanding attention is the voice of our Creator calling us to love and serve. You know, we could miss it, assuming that we're just hearing the voice of our own desires, our own guilt. But it's there, patiently speaking our name, waiting for us to respond. And yes, it is indeed a risk to believe that it could be the voice of God calling our name. In today's gospel lesson, Nathanael doubts his friend's voice. Philip has come with an invitation. We found the one we've been looking for all our lives. And Nathanael says, oh, sure. You're going to tell me that the promised Messiah comes out of Nazareth? No way. I'll buy a piece of the Brooklyn Bridge first. Come and see. No arguing, no explaining, no guarantees, just come and see. Pee Wee Reese, the Hall of Fame Brooklyn Dodger shortstop, heard a voice in the night. It was 1947, and the Dodgers general manager had just announced to the world that Jackie Robinson would be the first black person to play in the major leagues. Well, a group of Dodgers, led by their right fielder Dixie Walker, planned a protest against Robinson joining the team. And they asked Reese, because he was a white Southerner, to join the protest. And you know what? He refused. As a Christian, he would not deny Robinson the right to inherit some small portion of the earth. He recognized, trusted, responded to the voice in the night, a voice calling to him to do what's fair, to do what's right. And a voice in the night continues to call today. It's a call to trust, a call to serve in love, trusting that God is in charge of this world. It is a call to go and be the gospel in our community. The voice asks us to come and see. Come, it beckons us toward a renewed life of trust and service in the name of the one we call Lord. Yes, to obey this voice is to take risks, just as Pee Wee Reese took a risk. It's to take some chances. And certainly, we can hear voices of caution. Keep both feet on the ground, they warn. It's not hard to know which voice is God's, because God's voice is the voice of love. God calls us not to violence or hatred, but to sacrificial love, and we can always recognize that voice of love among all the others. While I'm at work, the phone may ring, and the voice on the other end that I've heard so often for 49 years needs no introduction. Hi, how are you doing? I recognize the love in the voice. There's no need to identify who it is. And the same thing applies to the gracious God who calls us. Recognition is in the voice itself, the voice of God who sent the beloved Son to save the world and to call the world to trust and serve. This is not just one voice among many. The voice comes from a heart of love. The voice of God is always a voice speaking love. I must invite you to join me in reflecting on the voices from last Wednesday's attempt to overthrow our government. Among the citizen terrorists were Christians who believed that they were called by God to fight to put God's chosen president back in the White House. That belief is baseless, misguided. It comes from a false God. How does their violence align with Jesus' teachings to love our neighbor and even to love our enemy? How does their intended mayhem that was planned beyond what we saw, the intent to kidnap and kill the vice president and targeted members of Congress, how does that mayhem compare to Jesus' call to sacrificial love? One has nothing to do with the other. Let's be clear. The voice of God is always a call to sacrificial love to achieve God's reign of justice. Any voice calling for violence to achieve selfish ambition, any voice that speaks of racial superiority is the voice of a false god. In the 1950s, someone heard a voice and rose up from his mat to trust and serve. The voice asked him to trust that America could free itself from racism, from prejudice, could free itself from a need to oppress some for the benefit of others. The voice came to Martin Luther King Jr., and many voices came to him. Many voices came to him decrying his dream of ending racism, of healing America of this evil. Voices condemned him, called him a communist, tried to involve him in illicit kinds of affairs. There were voices that spoke of violence toward him. And on the other side, there were voices of his own people that appealed to him to lead a violent set of protests. But he listened to the voice of God that asked him to appeal to the conscience of America. And that voice in the night asked Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday, by the way, we celebrate tomorrow, to ignore the calls of violence, to ignore the threats, to ignore all the barbs. The way of nonviolence was to be the only way to God's justice. Amid all the voices in the night, Dr. King dared to believe that it was God's voice he heard, because it was a voice calling him to lead in love in a time of intense anxiety and hatred. He answered, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And the world has never been the same. Is it impossible for us to do the same? I think it is not so hard to discern God's voice among all the noise. When God calls us to discipleship, it's always a voice of love, inviting us to have a part in the reign of God on earth, a reign of love and justice. Just as God called Samuel and Nathaniel, God calls us. And God calls each person on the basis of current events and of personal experiences. So our stories vary, but it's always God that issues the invitation. Sometimes God issues the invitation through human agency, as when Philip invited Nathanael. We are called and our lives change. we know the voice of our shepherd. We respond to the one who loves, who cares, who gives hope that what has been taken or lost will be restored. And because of that love-filled voice, we can arise to come and see, to trust as we love and serve. Will you pray with me? Lord, we thank you that you are God and we are not. Help us to trust that you are saving the world even as you speak, and give us the grace and resolve to play our small part in it. Amen. Together we affirm our faith